There we go. Dr. Massengill, how are you?
Well, sir, how are you?
Yeah, just make sure everybody can hear me. What's going on in the world of Moore County public schools?
Same old, different day.
Just different day. I know how that goes. So, what's going on? I know you're not too close, but everybody's trying to keep up with what's going on in Johnston County right now.
Got some friends there. A lot of board infighting, and Dr. Cosby, who was the interim superintendent there, very well respected, resigned because of it, and they've just appointed another interim.
And he resigned after 2 days?
Yep.
Oh, wow. And now there's a Gardner-Webb grad who was the up-and-comer, and I think they've named him superintendent. Was the assistant superintendent there?
I spent the first 8 years of my life in Johnston County.
It's a good place to be from.
Yeah, I can't believe what's going on there.
Past tense, yeah. Well, when this group next semester gets to 605, Steve Stone will work with them, and a lot of what we're talking about is what will be kind of the content that drives them, the micro political considerations.
Yeah. It's huge. We've got we're looking in our county right now. We've got 4 of our incumbent board members being primaried right now.
Wow.
So,
well, when the opposition acquires an acronym, you're in trouble.
That's it.
Levels of concern. Yeah, yep. When they get an acronym, it goes from orange to red. So that's amazing. I'm going to take it off share for just a second and see who we've got here. No, we don't. All right. It's about time to start. And so I'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome to Mels 603. This is Wednesday, the 22nd of January. I've got one housekeeping item before we get started. Jeanette Naiman has joined us this semester. She's coming back after having been out for a semester. She doesn't have a peer group like a Zoom group. And so in the C8 section, does anybody have a group that's less than 4 in the C8 section that would like to have a new member that's really on the ball? Let's see. Let me go to share and look and see who's in there. Let's see, somebody has responded to me. Okay. Oh, thank you, Carlene. Excellent, excellent. So what we'll do is we'll let her join in with Carlene's group since she was the first in. And thank you all for that. So I'm going to quickly respond to and so I'm going to say, and I'm going to copy her. See if I'll take care of that before we get started. There's Carlene. All right, that's taken care of. That's our housekeeping for the evening. Make sure everybody's in a group. And that leads me into the first thing that I wanted to cover tonight. I had a question this week about what your responsibilities are on your case studies. Well, it's real simple. You convene your Zoom group. You have, you know, the team leader or whoever's turn it is, and you know how that works. You get it together in a Zoom. All of you read the case before you get in there. Do any attendant reading, you know, like in your book or what you think that, you know, would be most appropriate, like 288, you know, North Carolina General Statute 115C 288 speaks to grading and classifying pupils. Who's the ultimate authority in that? Well, it'd be the principal. So, you know, I'll just go ahead and tell you that one right now. You need to understand it's going to be your call, not the teacher's call, not the superintendent's call. It's going to be your call. And so you need to know up front who you know, you can't pass the buck on this one. You got to make the call on the grade for this kid. Okay. You need to also look at zero tolerance. What's a zero tolerance policy? It's in our book. It's also, you can look at it online. It says that you can't just say, if you do this, this is what happens to you. Zero tolerance is not about cheating. Let me be clear. Zero tolerance is not about what the kid did. It's about what you do. This is about what we do as administrators. That's what this course is about. Can you just say, he cheated, we're going to fail him? The law says no. You can't just do that. You need to look at state board policy on how much things can count. You need to look at your local school board policies on the grading system in your district. Can one class assignment count more than the yearly more than half of the yearly grade? Can one assignment count that much? Let me give you a little clue. Even the state end of course or end of grade test can't count more than 30%. That's by state board decree. That's by their policy. That's law. You can only count an EOC or an EOG. They're up to 30% of the final grade. Most districts is 20%, but you can't count it more than 30%. This teacher is counting one class assignment more than 50% of the final grade. Can that be done? Can you support that? Can you exclude a kid for a year? That's what a zero tolerance is. He's excluded for a year. You say, well, they're failing him for the year, but he has recourse. He can go to summer school. Even if you offer an alternative placement, you cannot exclude a kid for a year on a zero tolerance. That's in the disciplinary data reporting manual. So you need to do your due diligence on these cases. You get together, you discuss them, and then you create a PowerPoint presentation. It doesn't need to be but 2 or 3 slides where you answer the questions. You kind of review the case, the salient points, and then you answer the questions. And so for the first one, now I've got one from last semester. I've got a recording of one. just to help you out in terms of what the expectation is. So if you want to know how it works, simply click on the link that I've got for you under Case Study 1 materials. I left that there, put that there for you so you would know how it's going to go, what it's going to look like. And then when you get done with that presentation, you upload it in the Dropbox here for the group project. That's that PowerPoint. Everybody's will be the same. Then you will write, I would wait until after class the night of the case study, but that's up to you. And then I would write my personal reflection of what I learned from this case study and what I learned from listening to other points of view. You know, you get the people on your team, 3 or 4 people, you get their perspective, but you get to hear the rest of your classmates, their perspective as well, and you'll get to hear my perspective. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm kind of dropping a dime on him here, but I'm going to rely heavily on Dr. Massengill and Dr. Tobias that night to give the perspective of a sitting principal who's in that hot seat right now, what they would do. I'm going to make sure that they give you from their perspective. I'm going to give you perspective as a former principal and sensor office administrator who supervised principals who had to deal with stuff like this. And then they're going to give you the perspective of somebody who's in the middle of the fray right now. But they fight the good fight every day. And we're going to tell you what we think as well, what ought to happen and where it ought to go. Now, we don't ask you what's going to happen. We ask you what your decision is going to make. But we're going to tell you what we think is going to happen and what your steps going forward are going to be as well. We're going to try to add a little bit of value that night and tell you, all right, here's the decision from the case. All right, going forward, what can we take from this? What have we learned? That would be maybe helpful in your reflection as well. So you can think about going forward, what would I do? Or you might think, well, I don't like what they said going forward. I'd do X, Y, and Z. Well, that's perfectly, that'd be a perfectly legitimate thing to say. Because you may be shocked what my going forward is going to be. I'll just leave it at that. I won't bet too many cat out of the bag. But now I have people who have complained about, well, Dale State going, boy, that's awful punitive. Well, sometimes you have to draw the line in the sand as an administrator in terms of you have to understand that, and the folks that work for you understand that there's some non-negotiables. There's just certain things we can't do. I got sent a really neat quote this week, and it fits this case. I don't know that I had it queued up a while ago, but let me see if I can find it again. I had it queued up. The quote of the day: I often sing the praises of intrinsic motivation and authentic passion for what we do, but the late Herb Lovett discussing teachers pulled me up short when he observed that we have a real problem in education when the people love what they do more than they love the people they do it for. And you've worked with people like that, and I've worked with people like that who are more interested in their content and being in charge than they love that more than they have love for the children. Now, I'm not going to tell you that. What I am going to tell you is most kids who need love the most deserve it the least, and their parents are even more insufferable than they are. But that does not mean that you, as principal, can allow people to mistreat children. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat in a parent conference when the appropriate answer to the parent would have been, "Your child's an idiot and it's hereditary," but you can't say that. You're not allowed to do that in this business. Well, just one time you can do it, but after that you won't get the opportunity anymore. I understand.
You save that experience until you can put the keys on the superintendent's desk.
Yeah, exactly. This case is set up to distract you with Bobby, his behavior. I'm quite sure that Bobby's a handful. His parents are a handful. His uncle on the school board is a handful. The superintendent, is a handful. But you got to focus on what you, as a principal of that building, what your core competencies, what your beliefs are. That's the going forward piece. Now, when you answer your questions, make sure you address the legal part and then the ethical part. And that's why I've got lesson plan, role of the principal with ethics. It covers, in that document is the duties and responsibilities of the principal, and it's got to grade and classify pupils. Also at the end is the 4 ethical paradigms that you need to address: character, critique, profession, justice. You have to character, critique, profession, and justice. You have to address those 4 ethical paradigms as well. And that's kind of what I'm talking about going forward past the legal. Then we get to the ethical. What's the right thing to do? What should you allow? What actions should you take as an administrator coming out of this case? That's the ethical piece. The legal piece, we'll hammer that out. But our going forward piece will be, all right, now what are you going to do going forward? What are you going to, so that, the best way, I'm full of metaphors tonight and some other things people might say, but the best way to get out of a swamp is don't get in one. And so how do you avoid this in the future? How do you make sure that you're not dealing with this every semester from this teacher or more teachers? How do you establish what your core competency is in your building? It's teaching and learning, and there's got to be a love of the students that come along with that. How do you establish that coming out of this? What should you do? That's what these case studies are about. These are real life scenarios with the pressures, the politics that come with them. There's great learning that comes out of these. It will do me no good to sit here and pull up the North Carolina General Statutes and teach you all 545 of them if you don't know how to apply them and where the law starts and ethical concerns starts. And that's a big part of the art, the art of school administration. So that's what we're going to do on case studies. If you have any questions, email, call me. I'll be glad to Zoom with you. If you'll watch the case study video that I have for you here, it will maybe clarify anything that you have in terms of the presentation. Address the questions legally and then ethically. So I have a question now. I'll go ahead and catch it. Where do we find who's in our Zoom team? They carry over from semester to semester. If you don't have one, let me see. If you don't have a Zoom team, let me go back to the chat. Mary has an opening as well as Kimberly. Okay, from last semester. I try to keep the Zoom teams together. A lot of people are very picky about that. They found people they like working with. I don't have a problem with that. If you want somebody new, let me know. But I like to try to keep our Zoom teams intact. Rosie says she doesn't have one. She's not sure. Kimberly says she loves her teams, like most people do, and they like to stick with their team. If Rosie needs one, Rosie, if you need a team, Mary's got a spot. I'd say she was the next on the list. I'm okay with Amy, but it's just the 2 of us. Is that, yep, 2's a team. I don't have a problem with that. Rosie could join Mary. That would be good. That would be great. If you need me to broker these, Jeanette, we've already. I sent you an email. You're with Carlene now. That was the first thing that we did tonight, was found you a new team, and I sent you an email. So Jeanette, if you're listening, you're with Carlene now. Amy and Victoria are going to work together. Rosie's going to join Mary. So that's all good. But yeah, that's what we were doing. The first was getting our teams hammered out for our Zooms. So we'll have our teams are ready to go. So thank you all for that. All righty. Okay, let me go back one more. All right, so Rosie's good too. See how easy it is if everybody gets along well. All right. So as always tonight, thank you for being with me again. First thing I want to do, and I got to move this out of the way. First thing I want to do is go over our weekly schedule. That's not it. Let's try this one. That's not it. Try that one. There we go. All right. So looking at our weekly schedule, this week we're looking at preventive law, developing risk and crisis management plans. You were to read the Principal's Guide to School Law, third edition. Or your discussion board this week is locate copies of your school emergency plan, read school law, and then assess your plan. Now, I had a question that came up this week. We meet on Wednesdays. Your work's due on Sunday night. We go week to week. We just happen to meet in the middle of the week. So if you've not got your plan in tonight, it wouldn't do tonight. Get your work in by Sunday night at 9. Don't make me stay up all night because I grade those. I read them. Some came in while I was in meetings on the road this afternoon. I will grade them tonight. I grade every day. But don't feel like you have to have everything done on Wednesday. You have till Sunday. And sometimes students like to wait until after we've had class. I know that this session's not that valuable, but sometimes they get clarification or they ask questions. So no, you're not behind. You got till Sunday night at 9 o'clock to get your work in. That's the way I set it up. You notice there was nothing due last week. So this will be your first weekly assignment. You should have already started your task 1. Now, I get questions all the time about, what does that response, what should we expect from a school emergency plan? So those were tightly guarded. Well, if you'll read this chapter in school law and look specifically on page 14 to 17, it'll tell you what you should find in that plan. That's why I have that there, because that's the first question I always get. What should I be looking for? Well, if you look in your book on page 14 to 17, it'll tell you. Now, you're not, in terms of it being tightly guarded, you're not going to take it with you. You're not asking, to make it public. You'd just like to look over it and assess how closely it fits the model of what the book says an emergency plan should have in it. And so now, also, I have a document in this week's Zoom that talks about what your crisis box and emergency plan, along with your emergency plan, it should be inside of your crisis box. Federal and state law says underneath the counter in the front, in the reception area of any public school, there should be a crisis box. That's a law. It's a requirement. So when first responders come, they know where to find it. In that crisis box, part of that is your emergency plan. And so if we look at, and I'll have to close some of these things. If we look at that, this is that document that's under session 2, and it tells you how to put them together and the background and the purpose and all those things. And then it also lists what should be in it: aerial photos, a map, your campus layout, your blueprint, your teacher, employee roster, student roster, fire alarm turn-off procedures, sprinklers, utilities, gas lines, TV, student photos or student lists, phone numbers, your designated command post and station, and then your emergency plan right here. That should be in there, your evacuation sites, student attendance, all these things should be in there. The one thing that we normally don't do is update those crisis boxes regularly enough. And part of the responsibility of your data manager, what's now your Power School manager, is they're supposed to print off a hard copy of all the student lists every Monday and update that list in the box. Too many times we do them at the first of the year and put them in there, and especially in schools that change, it's at midway through, some middle and some high schools change classes at semester. Then the second semester, they've still got the rosters from the first semester. It's supposed to be updated weekly with a list of students in there, evacuation sites. These are all things in the crisis kit that go along with the emergency plan as part of this. Like the evacuation sites, there's supposed to be 3. One's on your campus. It's usually out at your ball field. Second is within walking distance. The third is after you've walked to the second level evacuation site, you get picked up by buses and transported to the third level, which is far away. And so, have you designated those? Do you have a plan? All these other things, but your emergency plan says we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then all these other things are a part of that plan, like list of special needs, inventory of staff resources. All these things are a part of the plan that goes inside your crisis box, which should be under the counter. And so schools are getting better and better, unfortunately. And I say that not tongue in cheek, but schools have been forced to get better on both having their crisis box up to date and having a up to date emergency plan because of all the bad things that have been happening in schools. I was a high school principal during both Columbine and Jonesboro, Arkansas. We didn't have stuff like this back then. We just had a little list next to the telephone if somebody called in a bomb threat. That's the only thing that we had. We've done much better since that time, but it was out of necessity, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. The problem at Butler High School last school year in Charlotte, where there was a shooting and a student was killed in the commons area of the school, was that they didn't communicate. They didn't have their plan wasn't up to date. They sent out the wrong codes, or they didn't get it right in terms of evacuation. Some of the students went to the second level evacuation site where you walk off campus. Some went to the ball field. Parents couldn't find their kids. All the kids were not at the second level of site where they could be transported to the off campus site where they told parents to come to this area to pick up their kids. The kids weren't there. It did not go well. And so that did not go well for the superintendent. It did not go well for the principal. And I'll leave it at that. Neither are currently in place there anymore. So you can make of that what you will. But we're looking for you to assess their emergency plans, and again, 14 to 17, but also look for that crisis box, because the plan will be inside the box, or it should be. And if you find the emergency plan, you should find your crisis box at the same time. Are all those things there? If an emergency happened, the gas, would they know where to cut off the power, the water, the gas? All those things, are they all that material in there? If something bad happened at your school, does everybody know where to go? Do we know what the codes mean? Do we know when to evoke the code and who calls which code? Do we go to level 1, 2, or 3 evacuation? Level 1, ball field. Level 2, walk to a church or a similar place with a large parking lot nearby. Level 3, go to the large parking lot nearby and wait on buses to pick you up, to be transported to a facility further away. That's the kind of thing that you have to have. That should be spelled out in your emergency plan. Lockdown procedures. Are you going to use green and red cards, or are you just going to use red cards now? Are you just going to use green? Some districts are using green and red cards to put on the door. Some are using red, some are using green. Whatever system you have, is there cards in the room? Does everybody know what they mean? Do you do drills regularly? The best plan in the world is only good if you actually enact the plan and you practice and have your drills ready. So this week is about mitigating liability, in terms of we can't stop. Yes. Dr. Madison Gill responded, these plans are voted on every year and you should be able to access them. I asked my principal and he said he didn't have a copy. Should I contact my super? I normally would tell you there's somebody at the central office usually in charge of safety. That would be who I would get in touch with, not the superintendent. I would get in touch. your safety director, your assistant superintendent for auxiliary services, that would be the person that I would get in touch with if your principal says they don't have them. But let me go back and kind of catch where my train of thought again here. I can't promise you that you won't have a crisis at your school. What we're talking about here is how to mitigate the bad things that happen, number one, by knowing our plan and working our plan and having some plans in place. But also, number two, how to mitigate liability. Now, what that means is, were we negligent or not? Did we have plans in place and have we practiced them? What came out of the shooting at Butler is A, they didn't have plans in place, so B, they weren't practicing. They had no idea. That did not go well. I'm telling you, you don't want to go. You may have to go to court. You probably will. But the idea is not to lose. Mitigate liability. Make your campus safe for the people who work there and go to school there, for faculty and staff and students. But just, I hate to say it, just as importantly, make sure that you do this to make them safe, but also to protect your school, you and the school district from frivolous lawsuits. They're not frivolous if you didn't do your job, and that's what a jury or a judge will find. You've got to mitigate liability by having these plans and putting them in place, practicing them regularly. You will mitigate some of that liability that just normally comes with the school business. Now, that leads me into this document. When we look, and we will just in a few minutes, at 115C288, the duties and responsibilities of the principal, again, it will tell you clearly, you got to do a fire drill once a month, but you got to do safety inspection twice a month. That's the one that everybody forgets. That's what this document is for. You will use this document later on this semester. And when I ask you to do assessment of your facilities, it'll be a little bit later. But this is what I'm talking about. This is a guideline of how it ought to be. I have compiled this in one area. It's not, I don't have one of these. There's not one of these in the book. You know, if you want to know what an emergency plan is or what it's supposed to have, look in the book on page 14 to 17. If you ask me, Dale, what's an assessment inventory, where can this is it. I made this when we used it in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. I had to pull it from several resources, but these were the things that were important, that mitigate liability. Do you have separate drop-off and loading zones for car riders and bus riders? I mean, I don't know why every child in the world must be driven to school now, that nobody can ride the school bus, but that's modern times. I have one that goes along with that, but folks kind of get mad when I tell it. But so I'll save that one for another day. But it's not my decision. If it were up to me, we'd make kids ride the bus, and we wouldn't have to be so involved with cars. But it's modern times. If you have kids getting off a bus and they have to go through car traffic, or if you let cars go into your bus parking lot because parents don't want to sit in line and wait, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen, and you're going to lose it. Even though you say, well, I wasn't driving that car and we told them not to. Did you enforce it? Did you have signs up? Did you have somebody out there to make sure they weren't able to do those things? So you can kind of see down the line here, this is what the expectation is for your facility in terms of that twice monthly safety inspection. This is, you say, well, that's got more to do than don't leave, oily rags laying around. Well, your safety inspection is of your entire campus. And these are the things that are important: cameras, storage areas. You better, I mean, this is the entire thing. This covers, if you're in compliance with everything on this list, then there'll be, if you have a crisis on your campus, you're still going to be golden when it comes time for lawsuits. You can produce these documents. Look, we've got everything covered here. Things just happen. We can't stop everything, but we did everything in our power to make sure that something bad didn't happen on our campus. So 14 to 17 on the emergency plan and on your campus safety, that safety inspection that has to be done every 2 weeks. This is the document for it. I want to make sure I pointed that out too. Shifting gears a little bit, here's what I think are the really hot spots, and we're going to discuss these more as we get into the semester. And we'll talk about those kinds of things. And what I was talking about, these are some really important things in terms of student conduct, adult conduct, incidents, those kinds of things. I've got this tonight to kind of juxtapose. This is issues, safety concerns, issues, things that are policy that you work with in terms of content. The first two things I've got you working on are process. Emergency plans, crisis box, your safety inspection. That's physical things that either are in place or they aren't. That's things that when a crisis occurs, either you had it or you didn't. These are other things here that we can debate and talk about as we go through the semester, things that are good ideas, best practices, how to deal with this. These are situational things. Tonight is about operational things. Your emergency plan, your crisis box, your safety inspection, those are operational things. They're not situational or debatable issues. They're things, either you have them in place or you don't have them in place. And they're a check the box kind of thing. And if you don't have those things, that's the basics of safety to start with. Do you have these things in place? 1, 2, 3. Once you do, then we'll talk about how we're going to run school on the inside. How we're going to operate as adults and professionals. Those things are checking the box kinds of things. And if you don't have those in place, your liability exposure is tremendous if you don't have them in place. So we're not covering this list tonight. We'll get to all these things during the semester. They're kind of my list of the inside the building topics that we better hit on all semester long. It's kind of a roadmap of where our course is going to go this semester. These are all the kind of hot topic things. But that's separate and apart from the basic stuff. Got to have a crisis box. Got to have an emergency plan. Got to have a safety inspection plan. Without those, something goes wrong, you're toast. It's the end. I'm going to pause and catch my breath. We've covered all those things. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift gears here, and we're going to start talking about the North Carolina General Statutes, which are under 115C. And then there are 545 individual statutes that cover everything that you could ever wonder about. That they've got them there. And I'm going to kind of go through the list and talk about them a little bit. And then we're going to focus on 288C because that's your job as principal, is 288C. Anybody have anything that in terms of questions they have for me at this time? Okay, there comes one. So the question is what is the rationale why students should not linger in their cars before or after arrival, dismissal time, liability? Because you don't know what they're going to do out there. Somebody could kidnap them. They could do something else themselves. They're not being adequately supervised. The first thing that when you go to court for anything, first thing they ask, were students adequately supervised? And you can't adequately supervise kids that are out in the car by themselves. even if you got somebody on the lot. If they're inside the car, the law deems that's not adequate supervision. It's simply a legal thing. It's the difference. Now, if they're standing outside in clear view where you can see them, that's one thing. But if they're inside of a car, the law says that that's not adequate supervision. Now, the number is 1 to 45 in large gathering areas like the gym or the cafeteria, the auditorium. You got to have one adult for every 45 kids. That is the standard. That's been set up by the General Assembly, and it's the legal standard in court as well, 1 to 45. And so you say, well, I had somebody out there and it wasn't more than 45 kids. How can I get hit on a negligence lawsuit based on inadequate supervision? If the kid was in the car, you lose. You got to get them out of the cars. Otherwise, you don't have adequate supervision. Even if you have the right number of adults on site, in the car, not supervised. That's a no-brainer when you go to court. That's why schools harp on it all the time. That's one of the things that I used to have to get on principals about. This happened out in the parking lot. Well, why were they out in the parking lot in the car? And I get that, I get that stunned look of the perpetually stupid. Oh, I don't know. It's hard to do. They don't want to. How old are you? What do you mean don't want to? This is not their choice. This is up to you. They'll let you do. They'll do what you let them do. You got to get them out of the cars. We can't accept the exposure, the liability exposure of letting kids be out in the car unsupervised. They could do bad things. There is not a great deal of there's basically no difference in North and South Carolina statutes. That's a great question, Mary. They're just called titles in South Carolina. And they have fewer titles. You think, well, they got a lot less laws. No, they do a lot more subsection in their titles than we do in our statutes. Our statutes are all spelled out individually. They have 56 titles. They have the same number inside of them, but when you click on one of theirs, it might be several pages. Whereas North Carolina, they've got them all printed out individually. But I've sat and done that and compared the two and gone through the titles versus the statutes. It's all the same. It's pretty common. That's a great question. I should have already mentioned that, Mary. The titles in South Carolina they don't match number wise, but content they match pretty much completely. And that's a great question. So if we look at 115, it starts with 1. And it provides all kinds of information in terms of these statutes, everything that you can think of, from how the superintendent acts, teachers, principals, board members, funds, open meeting laws. I mean, it's how the board gets appointed, duties and power. I mean, voluntary shared leave, record confidentiality, which mirrors FERPA laws now. They had to put those in. All about accountability. That's the ABC's plan. The state superintendent of public instruction, how superintendents can be certified and hired. Oh my goodness, all the things about your school board. And if you read those, what we were talking about, Dr. Massengill and I, as we came on tonight, there's a district in North Carolina in Johnson County that the school board members are shall we say, misbehaving. They're not following all of these laws, and it's become a problem. And so the superintendent that they hired as an interim, Dr. Jim Cosby, who's probably the most respected superintendent of my lifetime, other than maybe Craig Phillips, he couldn't even deal with it because board members misbehaving and not following their elected responsibility and not following the law. But they are there. And so you go through all of these. That's your school district. Yeah, I knew that. And it has all these penalties for certain conduct. I mean, they're not supposed to be doing this stuff. Um, and they have powers and duties, but there's also penalties for bad behavior and illegal behavior. And so, advisory councils, you've got those set out, dropout prevention grants. I mean, you've got all of these um, work education workforce innovation program, how schools have to be organized. Um, a lot of things. General education, talks even advanced courses, comprehensive plan for reading achievement. I mean, you can't believe how the state. I mean, these laws address everything. And if you just read the titles of these, just the names of them, you begin to say, "Oh, I understand why we do X, Y, and Z, this, that, or the other." Um, Standards and Accountability Commission, School-Based Management and Accountability Program, all the stuff, Safe and Orderly Schools. I mean, you've got a tremendous alternative schools. Here's all the laws that set those up and how they have to work, uh, how you have to educate children with disabilities, all of these things. Look at all of the general statutes that they have for children with disabilities. Great day. Um, Children with chemical dependency, AIG, visual and hearing impairments, vocational and technical education, which, by the way, is funded by the federal government, CTE. But you got all these rules about how that works. Look at all of them.
Make sure you read your AIG statutes because your AIG parents are going to know them.
That's exactly right. All your EC parents, I don't know if everybody understands. AIG, academically gifted, is actually a part of Exceptional Children's Program. And you better believe all those parents know the law. And we're going to have a case study later this semester that speaks to, in my day, as I said, it was all the AIG and the EC parents that beat me up all the time that their children wouldn't get what they were supposed to get. Now it's the regular ed parents who say, because we're doing an inclusion model, that's preventing my child from getting what they're supposed to have. So the shoe's kind of on the other foot now. But you better believe all exceptional children's parents, and that's, AIG and all the exceptionalities, especially the children of autistic. Don't get me started on that one. That would be about a 30-minute rant, and I'd end up throwing something through the computer. They know the law. They know the laws. They know the rules. And some of them know the laws and the rules, but want you to do more than that anyway. And that would be the group that I just mentioned. I think that we are placing way too many students as autistic who don't actually meet the requirements because of parental pressure. That's not good for the kids. It's not good. And that's one of my rants is that sometimes the public and public pressure is ahead of statutes. In this case, I think ignoring the rules for placement is hurting children, and that hurts me. That in a lot of parents, there's not the stigma attached to autism as there is to other exceptionalities. And so a lot of parents whose children could be better served by being placed as learning disabled or in some other area are pushing for their kids to be labeled as autistic, even though they don't meet the criteria. And that becomes a crisis for you in the school business when teachers come and say, we're not serving this child well. What are we going to do? But their parent does not want them placed where they should, where their abilities where they should be according to our rules and guidelines. They want them over here, and this child's not being served. What are we going to do? That's become a hot topic as well. Everybody is pushing for the autistic label rather than learning disabled, mentally disabled. Those kind of designations, but that's become a crisis in a lot of the larger districts. is parents are seeking to avoid that stigma of exceptional children, those labels. It's much more in vogue to be autistic. So that's some of the things you got, but there are guidelines for those, just like there are guidelines for AIG. You better know the laws. You better know the placement system in your district. How do kids get placed in this? If you don't, the parents certainly will, and they'll skin you if you don't know. High school competency testing, that was repealed in 1986. I was a school administrator. I had previous to that, I had been a high school teacher, and we had to do competency testing in the 10th grade. But by the time I became an administrator, we had done away with it. It's illustrative to know that we tried that for years in North Carolina, and then we went away from it, and that was replaced by end of course testing, which is normative reference, which is criterion reference. The competency test was kind of like a general knowledge. It was normative reference, and it didn't show competency. It really didn't show anything, and so we moved from that to end of course testing in high schools, which is much more representative of what a kid does or doesn't know. Community Schools Act, State Advisory Council on Indian Education, Driver's Ed, North Carolina School of Science and Math, all these optional programs, great day that we have, support services, superintendents in terms of all the laws that go along with them, their duties, assistant associate superintendents, and then we get to principals and supervisors, and that would be you. Method of selection and requirements, salary, evaluation of principals, until we get to the one that is most relevant to this course, which again you'll use in your first case study when we talk about grading and classifying pupils, and that is duties and responsibilities of the school principal. Again, under case study 1, I've got lesson plan role of the principal, and that would be this, along with ethics. But this is what it looks like in the state statutes. The very, 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 very first one is our very first case study. I wonder why. This is the one that you're going to deal with a lot, and you say, well, how often does grades come up in school? Every day. I can tell you right now, every day, only every day. And so what you have to remember is it's you, not teachers. It's you that has the authority to grade and classify pupils. And so you can't be, well, the teacher assigned this grade, there's nothing I can do. Yes, there is. Superintendent can't change the grade, but you can. You know, when I teach this course in combination with 601 to doctoral students in curriculum instruction, when Steve Laws and I teach this course, Steve teaches from the superintendent's perspective. We teach 601 and 3. He does the superintendent part and I do the principal part. That's the first thing Steve will tell you. As superintendent, I can't change the grade. Principal can, but even I legally can't change a grade. That's the principal's responsibility. And so our very first case study is about a teacher assigning a grade where she fails a kid for the entire year by counting a daily class assignment for more than half of the yearly grade. It just says more than half of it. It could be 51%, it could be 99%, we don't know, but it's more than half of the yearly grade. What are you going to do? Well, it says that you have to be the person right here, and it says that in A, you have to be the person that makes that decision. And the reason I put that one in is when we talk about grades, when I go to the legal seminar every other fall, and I'll be back there in McKimmon Center in Raleigh in September, I'll be right there. Dr. Massengill will probably be there with me. They'll have the hot topics. And this continues to be, has been, always will be about the hottest topic, because we're talking about grade point average, salutatory and valedictorian, colleges, getting into certain programs, workforce development. Yeah, grades are the currency we trade on in public school, unfortunately. And it all comes back down to you. And you have all these things. You have the classwork, you have daily assignments, you have standardized tests, all those things. Your school board generally has policies on grading, on how much each one of these can count. And I'll just go ahead and clue you in. Nowhere in North or South Carolina is our class assignments allowed to count more than 10% of the final grade. No more than 10. Some districts only count them 5, but the state board of education sets that as a parameter. So they can't count more than 10. And in our case study, it counted more than 50% of the final grade. But most districts have adopted 10%. I know some 5, but that's the same in North and South Carolina. So we already know that we didn't follow the law. The teacher didn't follow the law in assigning the final grade in this course. What are you going to do? And that's why it said you can't make the decision based solely on standardized test scores. And so the state board in both places in North and South Carolina have put in the rule you can't count it more than 30. You don't have to count it 30, but you can't count it more than 30%. Even the end of grade or end of course tests can't count more than 30. Most districts have adopted a 20% rule on that. And they kind of go 20, 20, 20, 20, 10, 10. 20% standardized test, local assessment like benchmarks or quarterlies or whatever. The teachers average in terms of their tests, and then daily assignments and major projects. Those last 2 are usually 10, something like that. That's kind of the rule of thumb. Dr. Massengill, you want to weigh in on what your teachers, what your system is?
Yeah, so most all of the schools in our district, except for a couple of the high schools, use points. And so when we're looking at points grading, the grades were due to me yesterday for report cards on Friday. I have to look very carefully to make sure that the teachers, even with points, have enough assignments in order to meet that 10% threshold.
Yeah.
If they don't have enough assignments that they've posted, then even if the classwork is only counting as 10% of the points, if they, for instance, have more classwork assignments than they do assessments to a certain degree, then it could be counting for more than 10% of the final grade.
There you go.
The same is true for the board's expectation in our district that summative assessments not count more than 30% of the final grade. I have to check to make sure that they have enough summative assessments that even on the point system to where the student's grade is not negatively impacted if they don't have enough assessments. And so teachers always want to use the excuse of time for not having enough grades in the system. But you'll run into occasions frequently, I don't care what the school is, where you may only have a teacher who has 10 grades in for the entire 9 weeks. And one of them is a summative assessment that counts for 300 points. And if the student didn't do well on that, then they failed the semester no matter what the rest of the grades were. And so that type of situation occurs frequently, which is why I review teacher grade books often to make sure I'm not caught with surprises at the end of the 9 weeks. It's better to fix it as you're going through than to have to eat crow at the end of the grading period.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Massengill. That's what I'm talking about. You don't think that you think, well, grade and classify, when would that come up? It comes up every day. It will be the bane of your existence. I will tell you right now. You better
particularly with Power School. Because what I'm finding is that increasingly as parents and students become more familiar with it. I was dealing with a situation last week where we were looking at a parent that was complaining about a grade. The parent had logged into Power School 367 times since the first day of school. And that's not atypical for a lot of parents that particularly I serve with demographics in my school, but increasingly for all parents due to the prevalence of the Power School app on smartphone.
Mm-hmm. And as we have developed parent portals where we shuffle information to them all the time, here's the irony, folks. And we're winding down, and I'll pick up with this next week. Here's the irony. We ask for parents to be involved in their child's education. This is kind of the benediction tonight. I'm gonna let Dr. Massengill. Dr. Tobias is at a school board meeting tonight, but or she'd be with us, but she sends her love. And here's the benediction. When you ask for parent participation and you make that a priority in your school district, you don't get to then say, well, we just wanted you to help us on the positive stuff. We just wanted you to come and be part of the PTA or PTO or be the class mother. But now don't ask any questions or don't become knowledgeable about the process. See, it's kind of in for a penny, in for a pound. That parent involvement is a double-edged sword. Yes, it can help you, but they're also knowledgeable, and it can come back to bite you if you're not doing the right things. So my sermon tonight, when we got to our content and got to our statutes, is we'll cover all of them and we'll move through them as the next week we'll hit them, but we'll move through them as the semester progresses. But it's a mistake. It's a real mistake to think that teachers will take care of the grading. Power School will take care of the grading. It'll all take care of itself. Once I set up a system, it's all in there. I'll never have to worry about it again. You'll deal with it every day because of parent involvement. That's every cloud every silver lining has a cloud. The cloud of parent involvement is they'll be in your business about grades too. So you better be on top of it. You better know what's going on in your building. You won't escape it. It'll be a daily thing. It'll be something that you've got to check on regularly and that you have to work with teachers on, because some of them won't always conform to what the policies from the state board, the local board, they won't conform to those, or they will take license with that. And you are the one who ends up is ultimately responsible. Jonathan has weighed in. All failing grades should be moved up to a 50. Is this a state policy? That's a local board policy. The state board has, and I'll let Dr. Massengill, because he's closing us out tonight. And I'll get to Brenda's question after that. Local board policy speaks to moving, can't give, some districts you can't give below a 60, some it's a 50. The state board has weighed in and said that districts should set a policy on that, yes. They didn't say what the number was. They just said districts should have a policy on failing grades. And then all of them have adopted some policy. Usually it's either 50 or 60. It's not, the state didn't come out and say it must be 50. The state said you must have a policy. And then locals did that. Can I review task 1 and its expectations and offer some guidance? Look at the materials, look at the example. Again, in task 1 of the OMA, you're doing internal and external context. The internal context is all the things that's on your state report card. Attendance, teacher qualifications, academic performance, your disciplinary data in terms of suspensions, number of incidents, all of that stuff. And then does your school improvement team have any input on the school's budget? That's the biggies. The external context, look at your SACS or advanced ed report. It'll talk about average income. It'll talk about average education. It'll talk about the history of your school and those kinds of things. So that's what we're looking for. Look at the example. Go back and reread. But again, it lays it out for you in task 1. If you need me to help you more with that, send me an email and I can Zoom with you. Or more importantly, send your coach one and they can Zoom with you. Because they're really driving this. But I'll be glad to. Dr. Massengill will be glad to. Dr. We'll be glad to work with you on an individual basis on that. That's what Dr. Massengill and Dr. Tobias are here for that very reason, to work with you as individuals. They'd be very glad to. And so, Brenda, if you want to email Dr. Massengill, he's waiting with bated breath. He'd love to help you. And so, Amy, to answer your question, yes, the task 1 is due next Sunday. Not this Sunday, but next Sunday. You get 2 weeks on it. The discussion board is due this Sunday. So you get 2 weeks on the first one. So you're good on that one. All right. Any other questions before we go? Dr. Massengill would love to. Super Bowl Sunday. What's the Super Bowl? We don't get involved in things like that. Time rolls on. All right, Dr. Massengill, closing comments for tonight.
One thing I'd add is make sure that you know the school improvement team requirements, and particularly in terms of composition, since you were talking about parents. And the general statutes are very clear on how those parents need to be selected, but that, in my opinion, is not a hands-off process for the principal. The wrong parent on a school improvement team can ruin a principal. And so you need to manage that process very carefully. I have coined a term as it relates to that particular process called facility manipulation. In most schools, your PTA or your parent advocacy group is involved in the selection and election of those representatives to your school improvement team. Depending on what your board policy is, you'll have to take a look at your local board policy. But that's a really, really important thing. One of the most difficult things to me, going back to the grading piece and becoming a principal, or even becoming an AP who had responsibility over an entire grade level prior to becoming a principal, is not being that far out of the classroom. You assume the best of your former colleagues or those that are in the trenches, and you find out really quickly that if you don't inspect what you expect, then you're dooming yourself to a lot of negative consequences. Because at the end of the day, it's a building full of humans that will take the path of least resistance. And grades will get you in the most trouble very quickly. Grades and attendance. Grades are going to get you in trouble with parents and the superintendent. Your attendance could get you in legal trouble in court or with the superintendent, particularly if your PMR is incorrect, your principal's monthly report or about. And those are things that not all teachers take seriously, but from a liability perspective, those are probably the two most important things that you're in charge of, and the thing that you'll get in trouble really quickly when you get that subpoena, and those two things are not right.
Thank you, Dr. Massengill. Now, as a point to remember, we're going to cover the PMR and attendance and why attendance is important. We're going to cover that when we get to the finance part. We'll talk about modified accrual accounting system and how schools get their money, and it's based on attendance, and how if you get more than you're supposed to, it makes the state and the superintendent really mad. So your teachers have to take, number one, grading seriously. That's the part we're in right now. That'll get you in more trouble than anything else, as Dr. Massengill said. And then later on, we're going to talk about attendance and how important that is. All right. Yes, this is about keeping your pension. That's exactly right. This is about keeping your retirement. You'd like to do that. You'd like to keep your house along the way in your job, and then eventually your pension. But this is the stuff that gets you. This is the real inside steel. So
Thank
I know
you.
it doesn't look like much, but grades it's an everyday thing. We'll talk about attendance later. I appreciate you being with us tonight. I'm looking forward to our first case study. If you need help, Dr. Massengill, he's put his information out there. Either section, C6 or 6.8, C8, doesn't matter. He and Dr. Tobias are here to help us all. We're all in this together. If you want to email me, I'll be glad to spend time with you. I can do a Zoom with you as well. But we'll be glad to go through and help you anyway. So don't There's no dignity in struggle if you don't know what to do. The dignity and struggle is getting it all done. You knowing what to do and being excited and trying to get it all done. So we'll definitely be glad to work with you on an individual basis. I'll see you all next week. Let us know when we can help. Thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Have a great evening, everybody.
All right. Thank you.